You are 22 years old and nobody looking at you would assume you control anything valuable. You don't wear expensive watches, you don't drive exotic cars, you rent a small apartment on the edge of the city and pay for everything in cash. From the outside, your life looks temporary, replaceable, invisible. That is exactly why it works. The first time money enters your hands, it feels small. A few $1,000s from one delivery, then $10,000 from coordinating distribution across one neighborhood, then 50, then more. The growth isn't explosive at first, it's systematic. One route becomes 3, 3 become 12, 12 become an operation moving product through multiple districts without touching the product yourself even once. That is the first lesson of the system. The people making the least money take the highest risk. The people making the most money stay the furthest away from the product. At street level, someone earns $500 for carrying something across town. If they get stopped, they take the charge. If something goes wrong, they disappear first. But above them, there are organizers. Above them, suppliers. Above them, financiers. And above everyone sits the person who sees the entire structure but is rarely seen by anyone inside it. That person is you. Within 3 years, the numbers stop feeling normal. One distribution branch moves $300,000 a week. Another moves double that. Cash arrives from multiple cities. Every day there are transactions happening that you never physically touch but fully control. At scale, the organization clears several $1 million a month. By year 5, the annual flow is measured in hundreds of millions. But revenue and ownership are not the same thing. A business can move $1 billion and still be unstable. Cash can pile up faster than systems can manage it. Growth without structure becomes exposure. At first, it feels like control. You decide who moves where, who gets paid, which routes stay active, which ones disappear overnight. You decide what enters the city and what leaves it. Money solves problems fast. Loyalty becomes purchasable. Silence becomes affordable. But the larger the operation becomes, the less it behaves like money and the more it behaves like infrastructure. You are no longer managing transactions. You are managing logistics, cash flow, risk, communication, territory, trust, and failure at the same time. And every part of it can collapse independently. That is the illusion of the entry point. It feels like freedom because the money arrives faster than anything you've ever seen. But what's actually happening is different. You are not stepping outside the system. You are building a bigger one around yourself. By 25, your operation no longer feels improvised. It looks organized from the outside because it is organized. There are routes, schedules, inventory counts, payment cycles, fallback plans, and regional managers who report upward through layers designed to keep distance between you and the street. People imagine this kind of empire runs on violence or fear. In reality, it runs on structure. Every week begins with numbers. How much product moved through the west side? Which city underperformed? Which route lost volume? Which contact delayed payment? Which warehouse needs relocating? Which phone line was compromised? Every number matters because every number represents risk. A single distribution point moving $400,000 per week sounds efficient until you calculate exposure. If 10 points operate simultaneously, that's $4 million moving through the network every 7 days. Over a year, that becomes more than $200 million in movement from only one regional layer. Scale multiplies quickly, so do mistakes. Cash enters the system faster than traditional businesses can absorb it. That creates a structural problem. Money has to be stored, moved, cleaned, divided, reinvested, hidden, or converted without drawing attention. Cash itself becomes operational pressure. Millions in physical currency take up space. Weight matters, transportation matters, storage matters, security matters. $1 million in $100 bills weighs over 20 pounds. 10 million becomes hundreds of pounds. At scale, you are not just managing money, you are managing physical volume. Then comes distribution of profit. A courier gets paid per run. A coordinator gets paid weekly. Security gets paid separately. Drivers, lookouts, suppliers, lawyers, middlemen, accountants operating through legitimate businesses. Everyone takes a percentage. Every percentage compounds. Revenue may be enormous, but net control is smaller than it looks. If $100 million moves through one network annually and operational leakage consumes 35%, logistics another 15%, security and protection another 10%, laundering costs another 8 to 12%, the retained capital shrinks fast. The public imagines billion-dollar empires as endless money. In reality, they are expensive machines with unusually high margins and unusually high burn. And unlike legal businesses, losses can't be insured. If inventory disappears, it's gone. If cash gets seized, it's gone. If a route gets compromised, revenue disappears overnight. If someone flips under pressure, entire sections of the structure become liabilities immediately. That's why everything becomes compartmentalized. Nobody sees the whole map except you. One driver knows one route. One manager knows one warehouse. One supplier knows one port. One financier knows one layer of transactions. Information is split intentionally because knowledge itself becomes dangerous. The system survives through separation. And that separation creates another problem. The larger the empire becomes, the more isolated the top becomes from reality. People below report what keeps them valuable. Numbers become cleaner on paper than they are in practice. Problems get softened before they reach you. Missing money gets explained away. Delays become temporary. Small losses become handled. The structure still looks stable, but now it depends entirely on your ability to see weakness before the weakness reaches you. And by this point, you're no longer building. You're maintaining something so large that stopping it, even briefly, would cost millions. At some point, the money stops feeling temporary. That shift doesn't happen the day you become rich. It happens much later, quietly, when your behavior changes without you noticing. At first, you still live cautiously. You count expenses. You avoid unnecessary visibility. You wear ordinary clothes. You pay attention to every car parked too long outside your building. Every unfamiliar face feels relevant. You treat money as unstable because you remember what it felt like to have none. Then the system keeps paying. Every week more cash arrives. Every month the operation grows. Numbers repeat themselves long enough to feel reliable. Reliability becomes confidence. Confidence becomes adaptation. You upgrade your apartment, but not too much. Then you buy property through someone else's name, then another, then commercial space tied to legitimate businesses, a restaurant, a logistics company, a nightclub, a small real estate holding company. On paper, everything begins to look legal, structured, professional. The money is still moving the same way. But now it has places to live. Your daily routine changes with it. You stop going places that feel random. You begin preferring controlled environments, private rooms, reserved entrances, familiar staff, people who already know not to ask questions. Your circle becomes smaller but more expensive. You start measuring trust differently, not by loyalty, not by friendship, by usefulness. Who solves problems quickly, who stays quiet under pressure, who follows instructions without improvising, who can handle money without touching too much of it, who can lose access to millions and still say nothing. That becomes your version of stability. Your spending also changes, though slower than people would assume. The fantasy version of wealth is visible: jewelry, cars, designer, everything. But real operational wealth tends to stay hidden longer. Public attention creates friction. Friction creates investigation. So instead of spending loudly, you spend strategically. Security systems, encrypted communication, lawyers on retainer, shell companies, accountants, vehicles registered elsewhere, properties held indirectly, people managing things for you that never mention your name. These aren't luxuries, they're infrastructure expenses, and still, lifestyle expands around them. A penthouse becomes normal, flying private becomes efficient instead of extravagant, carrying large cash reserves becomes routine, paying 6 figures to solve a legal issue becomes just another monthly event. The numbers stop shocking you because repetition removes emotional weight from them. This is where adaptation becomes dangerous, because your nervous system adjusts faster than reality does. You become used to handling $500,000 decisions in a single afternoon. You wire money without hesitation. You authorize movement across cities while eating dinner. You move resources the way ordinary people move money between checking accounts. And because it keeps working, your confidence increases. But adaptation creates blindness. What once felt high risk begins to feel ordinary. What once required calculation becomes instinct. What once would have terrified you now feels like a Tuesday. That is how large systems become personally dangerous, not through one dramatic event. Through normalization, you adapt to the money, you adapt to the scale, you adapt to the pressure, and eventually you adapt so completely that you stop noticing how much of your life now depends on something that cannot safely fail. By now, your empire no longer feels like something you built. It feels like something you are required to keep alive. That difference matters. In the beginning, every move created growth. A new connection increased distribution. A new route expanded territory. A new supplier increased volume. Expansion felt optional because every decision pushed the operation forward. Now expansion is no longer optional. Now it is maintenance. The system consumes cash faster than it did when it was smaller. More people depend on it. More routes require financing. More properties need funding. More vehicles need replacing. More legal problems appear. More people need to be paid before they become dangerous. The machine has grown large enough to feed itself only if it keeps moving. That's dependency. At this stage, slowing down feels more dangerous than continuing. If volume drops 10%, some distributors start looking elsewhere. If cash flow delays by 2 weeks, payments stack up. If one region underperforms, another must overperform to cover it. If enforcement pressure increases in one city, resources must be redirected from another. Nothing operates independently anymore. Everything is connected to everything else. You are no longer controlling separate businesses. You are controlling one ecosystem built on constant motion. And the more money it generates, the more expensive it becomes to sustain. A private security team costs hundreds of thousands per year. Legal defense across multiple jurisdictions can reach 7 figures annually. Properties tied to operations require maintenance regardless of performance. Shell companies cost money. Logistics cost money. Trusted people become expensive because keeping trustworthy people close becomes part of risk management. Even silence has a cost now. Someone gets arrested. Legal support costs money. Someone wants to leave. Exit money. Someone knows too much. Retention money. Someone becomes nervous. Loyalty money. At scale, every problem becomes financial. And because you can afford to solve problems financially, you begin solving everything that way. That creates a second dependency. People around you stop depending on the business. They start depending on you personally. Your managers depend on you for direction. Your lawyers depend on you for payment. Your suppliers depend on your volume. Your inner circle depends on access. Entire neighborhoods begin adjusting to the money your system creates. Bars stay open because your people spend there. Businesses survive because your network moves cash through them. Real estate holds value because your companies buy into it. The system expands beyond the operation itself and begins shaping the local economy around it. That's when it becomes dangerous in a different way. Because collapse would no longer affect only you. It would affect everyone connected to it. And the larger it gets, the harder it becomes to tell whether people remain loyal to you or loyal to what your continued existence financially provides them. This is the hidden cost of scale. The money looks like freedom, but the structure underneath starts behaving like obligation. And once the empire reaches that size, walking away is no longer a personal decision. It becomes an economic event. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It builds in layers. At first, it's operational. A shipment arrives late. A payment doesn't clear on time. One route underperforms for 3 weeks straight. One trusted contact stops answering calls for 12 hours longer than usual. Small disruptions. Individually manageable. Financially survivable. Then they begin stacking. A supplier raises pricing because border movement has become riskier. Another loses inventory before delivery. One warehouse needs to be abandoned immediately. A regional manager starts losing people faster than he can replace them. Product quality slips in one district. Violence rises in another. Demand remains strong, but consistency weakens. And inconsistency is expensive. If one major route normally moves $1.2 million per week and drops to $700,000 unexpectedly, that missing $500,000 doesn't disappear from the expense side. Salaries remain, security remains, storage remains, legal retainers remain, transport remains. Your costs are fixed even when revenue becomes unstable. That creates compression. Cash is still coming in, but less of it stays liquid. At the same time, pressure begins coming from outside the business. Law enforcement pressure increases first at the edges. More stops, more surveillance, more seizures. More unfamiliar activity near locations that used to feel clean. Then financial scrutiny increases. Banks begin flagging movement. Accountants become more cautious. Lawyers become more expensive. Then political pressure enters. A new prosecutor wants visibility. A city task force needs results. A federal agency starts investigating larger networks instead of street-level arrests. Headlines begin focusing on trafficking routes, distribution chains, money laundering, organized finance. You stop reading news casually, now you read it strategically. Every arrest in another state feels relevant. Every seizure report gets analysed. Every indictment matters because the structure is connected in ways the public never sees. Then comes internal pressure, the kind that's harder to measure. Your people feel it before they say it. Managers become tense in meetings. Conversations become shorter. Trust becomes slower. More questions go unanswered. More people start asking for more money to keep doing the same job they did 6 months ago. Fear changes pricing. Loyalty becomes more expensive under pressure. You notice something else too. Your own decisions slow down. Not because you know less, because every decision now carries more weight. Moving product across one route isn't just revenue anymore, it's exposure. Replacing one person isn't staffing anymore, it's trust risk. Expanding into one city isn't growth anymore, it's liability multiplied across a new geography. And while pressure builds around you, the machine still expects output. Money still needs to move, people still need to be paid Friday, suppliers still expect confirmation, security still needs funding, the operation still wakes up every morning whether you're ready or not. That's the part no one sees from the outside. People imagine power feels like control, but at scale, power often feels like constant response, constant solving, constant correction. And constant awareness that one wrong move at this level doesn't create a small problem. It creates a chain reaction. The first major mistake doesn't feel like a mistake when you make it. It feels reasonable, necessary even. That's how large systems fail. Not because someone makes one obviously reckless decision, but because a series of decisions seem justified in the moment and only reveal themselves as errors much later. Your first misjudgment is believing scale protects you. By now, the operation moves so much money that individual losses no longer feel threatening. If one route fails, there are 8 more producing revenue. If one warehouse gets compromised, another can replace it. If one city slows down, another continues growing. Diversification creates confidence. Confidence slowly becomes overconfidence. You begin assuming the size of the empire makes it durable. But size often creates fragility instead. A small operation can disappear overnight and rebuild elsewhere. A large operation leaves footprints, property records, financial patterns, employee behavior, communication networks, supply repetition, vehicles, predictable movement. Scale makes replacement harder. The second mistake is expansion during pressure. Because revenue is tightening, the instinct is to grow further to offset losses. More territory, more volume, more partnerships, more infrastructure. On paper, the numbers justify it. If one region loses 15%, another region can cover it with 20% growth. That logic works financially until it doesn't operationally. Because every new layer introduces more people. More people means more variables. More variables mean more leaks. More leaks mean less control. And control is the only thing holding the system together. Then comes the most expensive misjudgment of all, trusting information because you want it to be true. Managers begin filtering what reaches you. Numbers still look profitable. Reports still show growth. Everyone continues presenting stability because instability creates fear, and fear threatens everyone's position. Bad news starts arriving late, sometimes too late. Missing cash becomes temporary delay. Declining volume becomes seasonal slowdown. A compromised route becomes already handled. An internal betrayal becomes just a rumor. You approve decisions using information designed to calm you, not inform you. That changes everything, because the larger the organization becomes, the less you can personally verify. You depend on reporting, and reporting depends on incentives. If the people beneath you benefit from showing success, then success gets shown whether it exists or not. Soon you're making multi-million-dollar decisions based on incomplete truth. Buying more property, funding more movement, committing more capital, backing people who are already unstable, doubling down on infrastructure that no longer matches reality. And because cash is still flowing, nothing immediately feels broken. That delay becomes dangerous. You mistake delayed consequences for proof of correctness. But delayed consequences are still consequences. By the time the numbers begin clearly showing the truth, the money has already been committed. The expansion is already built. The people are already hired. The risk is already distributed across the entire system. And reversing it now would cost almost as much as continuing. That's when misjudgment becomes irreversible. Not because the empire collapses in one moment, but because the wrong decisions are now embedded into the structure itself. You don't notice the instability when it begins because from the outside, the empire still looks successful. Money is still moving, people are still getting paid, product still reaches every route on schedule, cars still arrive, warehouses still open, meetings still happen, the structure remains operational. That's what makes this phase dangerous. Collapse doesn't begin when things stop moving, it begins while everything still appears to be functioning normally. The first visible cracks appear in places that seem manageable. A regional manager disappears with cash that was supposed to be delivered 2 days earlier. One shipment arrives incomplete, another gets delayed without explanation. Inventory reports from one district no longer match revenue totals from another. At first, it looks like ordinary operational leakage. You've seen losses before. You've dealt with missing product before. But now the frequency changes. The losses aren't isolated anymore. They start repeating. At scale, repeated small failures become structural failure. A missing $50,000 used to be a problem. Now it becomes background noise. But 10 missing payments in 10 different parts of the system become $500,000. $500,000 becomes several million by quarter end. And money isn't the most dangerous part. The dangerous part is not knowing exactly where the loss began. That uncertainty spreads fast. People start protecting themselves before they protect the business. Managers hold information longer before passing it upward. Suppliers demand earlier payment. Some ask for higher premiums just to continue operating. Security costs rise because trust drops. People begin keeping backup plans privately. Conversations become shorter. Meetings become more controlled. Fewer phones, fewer names spoken aloud, less eye contact, more silence. You feel it before anyone says it directly. The organization is still standing, but confidence inside it is weakening. Then external instability joins internal instability. Increased pressure from authorities slows transportation. A route that once moved in hours now takes days. One compromised location affects 3 others because the system became too interconnected. Legal expenses rise sharply. Money that once went into expansion now goes into containment. Instead of funding growth, cash starts plugging holes, and the holes multiply faster than expected. What once felt like momentum now feels like maintenance under pressure. Every morning starts with problem solving. Every night ends without real resolution. You're no longer thinking about expansion 5 years from now. You're thinking about what must be fixed before next week. This is where systems become fragile. Not when revenue disappears completely, not when everything crashes publicly, but when the machine still moves while every internal part begins wearing down at the same time. And the most dangerous realization arrives quietly. The empire is still large enough to look powerful from the outside, but internally it now requires constant intervention just to survive 1 more month. You always believed control meant staying above the chaos. That if you never touched the product, never appeared in photos, never signed anything directly connected to the operation, then you controlled the risk instead of carrying it. For years that logic worked. Distance protected you, structure protected you, layers protected you. But eventually scale changes the meaning of control. The system grows so large that even the person at the top can no longer see all of it clearly. That realization doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives through moments. You receive 2 different revenue reports for the same week with numbers that don't match. You ask for clarification. Nobody gives a clear answer. A trusted contact says one thing, another says the opposite. Both sound believable. Neither can be verified quickly. Then one regional manager disappears entirely. His phone is dead. His assistant claims he left the country. Nobody knows if he ran, was taken, or was removed by someone inside the system. At the same time, one of your legal fronts gets audited, then another bank account gets frozen, then a shipment worth millions vanishes before reaching destination, and nobody can tell you exactly where it was lost. The issue is no longer operational pressure. The issue is visibility. You built the empire through compartmentalization because compartmentalization protected everyone. Nobody saw the full picture except you, but now even you no longer see the full picture. Too many layers were added. Too many people began controlling too many moving parts independently. Information that once reached you directly now arrives, filtered through 3 or 4 people before you hear it. By the time it reaches you, it has already been reshaped, and decisions made with delayed information become dangerous immediately. Cash reserves begin shrinking faster than expected. Debt between internal partners rises. Some people start moving money off the books before reporting losses. Others start preparing exits privately. Loyalty changes form again. It becomes temporary. You notice yourself asking the same question repeatedly in meetings. What am I not being told? Nobody answers that question honestly because nobody benefits from answering it honestly. For the first time since the empire began, you are surrounded by movement you cannot fully trace, money you cannot fully account for, and people whose next decision you cannot predict. That is the moment control disappears, not when the business stops functioning, but when the system continues moving while no longer fully obeying the person who built it. And once that happens, you're no longer running the empire, you're reacting to it. Collapse is slower than people imagine. From the outside, they expect one dramatic event: raids, headlines, arrests, millions disappearing overnight. But large systems rarely fail like that. Collapse usually happens through exhaustion, through accumulation. Through too many weak points failing at once while everyone inside pretends the structure is still stable. Your empire doesn't disappear in one night. It starts shrinking unevenly. One route shuts down permanently, then another becomes too expensive to maintain. One supplier cuts contact without warning. Another demands terms so aggressive the margin no longer makes sense. Warehouses begin closing faster than new ones open. Vehicles stop moving as frequently. Meetings get smaller. Fewer people show up. The numbers finally stop lying. Weekly movement that once reached several million drops by 20%. Then 35%, then more. Revenue is still large by ordinary standards, but this is no longer an ordinary business. The infrastructure was built for peak scale, peak staffing, peak movement, peak cash flow. The machine was designed for growth, not contraction. That becomes catastrophic. Fixed expenses remain even while revenue falls. Properties still require payment. Legal teams still bill monthly. Security still costs money. Outstanding debts between partners still exist. People still expect compensation based on what the empire used to be, not what it has become. And because everyone remembers how much money once moved through the system, nobody adjusts quickly enough. You liquidate assets to preserve cash. Properties go first, then vehicles, then businesses tied to laundering operations, then reserves meant to protect the future get spent solving the present. Still, it isn't enough. People leave quietly, some disappear with money, some negotiate their own exits, some begin cooperating elsewhere, some simply vanish and never call again. The people who once built the system with you now start building distance from it. The empire becomes smaller every month, but more expensive every month at the same time. And then comes the worst part. Silence. Phones that once rang constantly stop ringing. Fewer emergency calls, fewer updates. Fewer opportunities, fewer threats, fewer meetings, less movement. For years, your life was built around speed, pressure, urgency, and constant decisions. Then suddenly there is empty space where that pressure used to be, and in that space you begin seeing the structure clearly for the first time. How much of it depended on momentum? How much of it depended on fear? How much of it depended on people continuing to believe it was untouchable? And once that belief disappears, everything connected to it begins collapsing under its own weight. By the end, the empire doesn't feel stolen from you. It feels like something enormous slowly consumed itself from the inside, until there was almost nothing left to hold together. Years later, the money is no longer the first thing you think about when you look back. That surprises you. For a long time, you believed the story would end financially, with profit or loss. With what was earned, what was spent, what disappeared, what remained. But distance changes the accounting. What stays with you isn't the total revenue. It isn't the billions that moved through the network. It isn't the properties, the cash reserves, the negotiations, the routes, the meetings, or the growth. What stays with you is the structure itself, and what living inside it slowly changed. You built something massive because, at the beginning, scale looked like security. More routes meant more protection. More people meant more reach. More money meant more freedom. More distance between you and the street meant less risk. Every decision made sense when viewed individually. Every expansion had logic behind it. Every layer solved a problem created by the layer before it. That's why the system became so large, and that's why it eventually became impossible to control. Because the same mechanics that created growth also created dependency. The same compartmentalization that protected the structure also blocked visibility. The same money that bought speed also increased pressure. The same scale that looked powerful from the outside made collapse far more destructive when momentum reversed. In the end, the empire didn't fail because there wasn't enough money. It failed because the system became too complex to govern cleanly. Too many moving parts, too many people financially tied to continued expansion, too much capital moving faster than oversight, too much trust placed in incentives that eventually shifted, and once enough of those incentives changed at once, the structure stopped behaving like an organization and started behaving like instability. That becomes the final lesson. Most people imagine empires collapse from attack, from raids, betrayal, competition, violence. Sometimes that happens. But more often they collapse because their own internal logic stops working at the size they reached. The structure outgrows the person running it. The machine becomes larger than management. And once that happens, even the person at the top becomes another part inside it. You built the empire believing you owned it. Years later, looking back clearly, you understand something different. For a long time, it owned you.